So let's jump in and get right going for what God has for us. Of all the biblical truths that I get to preach on, there are a few that I enjoy preaching on more than the concept of biblical generosity. We have spent the summer giving ourselves away in missions, in outreach, and numerous opportunities to stand in the gap for the hurting and the marginalized. It's been an incredible summer. It's been a testimony of your love, your faith, your trust. It's just been incredible. Last January, I was in a meeting of clergy, about 25, 30 clergy members, and the discussion came around to the new tax law, right? So the clergy began to get to the place, and they began to talk how it would dramatically impact their church. They just said it would dramatically impact the need for, the benefits from tax-deductible charitable giving. Literally, you would have thought that the kingdom sky was falling. I have never heard so much collective fear-mongering and negativity and woe is me and the wringing of hands, and it just fed on each other for half an hour. This sole single issue, man, they were like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And people begin to anticipate that giving would go down. Pastors at the table begin to list the people they were going to have to let go off their staff, people that had no idea that their boss was planning to fire them. I mean, it was craziness. It was like, and missions, missions, they wouldn't be able to do missions anymore. And it was crazy. The kingdom sky was falling. So you know me. So I sat silent for a while. And during the pause in despair, I spoke. I said, when did we start living by sight and not by faith? What happened to the belief that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills? I said, make no mistake about it, tax deductions have always been a horizontal American blessing for a vertical act of biblical obedience. The Christian in Thailand did not get up this morning fretting over the tax benefits of his charitable giving. He worried about whether his neighbor was going to go to hell. That's what he was worried about. I said, I don't know about your churches, but at Georgiana, our relationship is with a holy God who gave it all for us. It is not a spiritual relationship with the IRS that we have. We will always render under Caesar's. What is Caesar's? But make no mistake about it, we think the rest of it belongs to God, and what Caesar don't know is his part belongs to God too. Right? Finally, I said, if my people quit giving because they have lost the tax benefit, then I hope they fire me the next day because I've done a pitifully poor job of helping them understand what the biblical truth about giving is. If we've only been giving to get a tax benefit in our church, then I should be done the next day. It's a good thing that ministry isn't a popularity contest because I would be losing. I was not a popular guy that day. They've not invited me back to that meeting. I don't know. I hear they're still meeting. They're just meeting without me. So listen, Dee Dee and I have always lived by the Malachi 3:10 approach to giving. God says, when you are faithful with the tithe, see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that you will not have enough room for it. We've always believed that we had been blessed in order to be a blessing. You see, I believe there's a direct correlation between our capacity to love and being generous. After all, God's love is a generous love. He loves without end. He loves without limit. He loves when we don't deserve it. He loves before we respond. In fact, his love can't be earned. Right? If we're just honest, none of us have ever done anything worthy enough to deserve this kind of love. This divine love goes before us, it surrounds us, and as Scripture tells us, it is a never-ending stream. God is love, and his love is generous. I believe that generosity is one of the attributes that all God's children should have. In fact, I would go as far to say is that it is a great barometer, a great telling side of your Christian walk with Christ is based on how generous you really are. It is the evidence of God's love in us when we're generous. Generosity should be a natural byproduct of God's amazing grace in our life. The problem is generosity has often been easily open to interpretation. Oftentimes what we think is generous is sometimes nothing more than the leftover scraps of our abundance. Now we're meddling, right? That what if generosity, what we think is generosity, is nothing more than the leftover scraps of our abundance. Part of the problem is Americans, we don't define abundance really well. It's funny how no one thinks they're very rich, even the very rich, but everyone thinks they're super generous. How is that possible? Nobody thinks they've got anything, but man, they think they're super generous with all that nothing they have. Generosity is one of those words that just trends towards personal interpretation. There's really no grading system for generosity. There's no way to measure how you're doing. I mean, you just get a feel for it or whatever. It's a lot like junior high gym class, right? There's no grading system for junior high gym class. If you put your exercise clothes on and walk out in a breathing body, pretty good chance you're passing junior high gym class. Right? Back in my day, you had to climb a rope, go under there were some requirements. But now you just got to put gym shorts on and a t-shirt that says your school, show up and still be breathing at the end of class, pass. Right? I mean, there's no grading scale for that. In the same way, if you have ever given $1 to a homeless person or directions to a tourist from New York or smiled at a stranger, you might be very well sitting here this morning thinking, I don't even know why we need to preach on this. Why we got to talk about this? I got this, right? Because you think already, man, I'm super generous. The thing is we live in a world that reinforces the fear of scarcity, the anxiety-producing possibility that we'll never have enough. But God calls us to surrender our fear by trusting in his provision. We'll be at a table of provision in a few minutes. I have always believed that there's a critical correlation between fear and the lack of generosity that exists in our world. Thomas Aquinas, the great theologian in the Middle Ages, said fear causes a contraction of the soul. He compared it to the effects of a person in a city under siege. He said when an army came and attacked, everybody in the surrounding villages gathered their pigs and their livestock and their family members, and you all went inside the city walls and the city gates, the fort, whatever it was, and you went in there and you just kind of got in there and gathered and barricaded yourself in, and you were safe in there. From this contracted, inward-focused position, they would hunker down and hope that their food and water could outlast the attacking army's willingness to fight. Similarly, when we're afraid, we contract, we pull back, we withdraw, we grip our resources and assume a posture of protection and self-preservation that doesn't look anything like Christianity. In these moments, we can only think about ourselves, our needs for survival. From this defensive position, it's almost impossible to love because you can't love when you can't give. And if you're not given, then there is no love. You're gripped with the fear of scarcity. The thing is, our enemy, you need to understand this, our enemy loves siege warfare. He loves siege warfare. He doesn't quit. You can't outlast him. He never goes away. It's why Jesus said that the kingdom should be forcefully advancing. And I believe that love is the tip of the spear. I want us to be repelling darkness. I want us to be shining with love. I want us to be on the spiritual offensive when it comes to this world and the attacks that we're under. I believe that love always produces something tangible, something fruit-bearing. Love, when poured out liberally, is the fertilizer that makes everything grow. It paves the road of hope. This kind of generous love is true for your marriage. It's true for your friendships and your relationships. It's true vocationally. Love always leaves something in its place. And the same is true for generosity. It always leaves something in its place. The enemy has no defense for this kind of selfless and unconditional love. The world can't explain it, and the devil can't stop it. It's why love wins at the end of the day. The cool thing about the economy of God is that when his love is distributed generously, not only does it flow freely, but God is also the God of the resupply. Not only does he replace what you've deposited in the world, but oftentimes, because you have been faithful with what he's given you, he gives you more. When we give sacrificially, we're putting ourselves in jeopardy by the world's perspective, but in God's eyes, he doesn't see it as reckless. He sees it as an issue of who and what we put our trust in. It's an issue of faith, right? This is why God tells us to whom much is given, much is expected. I feel this divine pressure for us all the time because I realize we have been given a great deal. We've been blessed. I mean, you just turn the page at everything we do on Sunday morning, and you're just going to go blessing, 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 blessing. We just had 3 teenagers lead worship in Belize come up here and sing this morning. Blessing, blessing, blessing. We're just going to buy 2,000 Cambridge shirts. Blessing, blessing. I mean, I feel the pressure for us For whom too much is given, much is expected. God intends for us to shine. Go to 1 Timothy 6. Paul writes the young pastor to provide some advice on this issue. We're going to pick it up in verse 17. Notice the first word in that line. The first word in that line is what? Command. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Command. Thank you very much. Notice what he is. It's not, he doesn't say to Timothy, hey, can I make a suggestion? And he doesn't say, listen, when you're sitting around the campfire at night eating fish and stale bread, just if it comes up, just talk about this. He doesn't say, if you can kind of work it into a conversation. No, he says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good and to be rich in good deeds and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. So it turns out when you're giving your life away, you are gaining the life that God intended for you to have. Here's the deal. I think most Christians know this intellectually, but they live like it's a lie. They live like God is not watching. They live like generosity is open to self-interpretation, or worse than that, they live like it's optional. For most people, generosity does not come naturally. It's why an unbelieving world does not understand why a basket passed in front of you and you put money in it. They don't get that. Makes no sense to them. It's countercultural to them that you could just pass a basket in a room. People dump money in it. It makes no sense to them. Think about it when you were children. You fiercely protected your toys, right? I mean, what is the language of a 3 and 5-year-old? Mine, 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 mine. I know. I saw your children at VBS. They all have this opinion. It's like mine, 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 right? And as they become teenagers, they're all of a sudden more interested in fairness than benevolence. Did I get my share? They want to be fair. Was that fair? Did we all get a trophy? Did we all get rewarded? I mean, there's the fairness thing. And then here we graduate to a phase in our life where the focus when we're young adults is on getting our due. We want to get what's owed us. Yeah, I've worked hard. I went to college, got good grades. I'm owed something. Only to reach full adulthood and find that we are weighed down by every financial worry that you can possibly imagine. This pattern of existence repeats itself over and over again, makes it very hard to live open-handed in this world. But like all things biblical, God calls us to a different way of life, a different way of understanding about our stuff. I believe if we will open our heart to generosity, you will be amazed at what God will deposit in your heart. If we will open our heart to generosity, soon we will be able to open our hands to give it away. I want to share a passage of scripture that Paul writes in Corinthians. I love how the New Living Translation phrases it. It's in chapter 8. Paul says, now I want you to know, dear brothers and sisters, what God in his kindness has done through the churches in Macedonia. Now just pause there for a second. The churches in Macedonia were Gentile Greek churches. They were pagan people prior to coming to Christ. The Macedonia churches are taking an offering for the Jerusalem home church, which is made up of Jewish Christians who would have thought themselves a little better than the Macedonian Christians because, after all, they are closer to the true line of faith. Keep in mind the movement from Macedonia to Jerusalem. Paul says they are being tested by many troubles, and they are very poor, but they are also filled with abundant joy, which has overflowed in rich generosity. Paul says, I can testify that they gave not only what they could afford, but far more. And they did it of their own free will. They begged us again and again for the privilege in sharing in the gift for the believers in Jerusalem. They did even more than we had hoped for their first action was to give themselves to God and then to us, just as God had wanted them to do. I love, 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 love this passage. I think it's a model for biblical generosity. It is a model for biblical living and generous giving. When was the last time that you were on your knees begging God to give you an opportunity to give something away? When was the last time that you just poured your heart out in prayer and said, Lord, I just want to give it away. Just help me. I beg you, Lord, let me give it away. Like I do every year at Compassion Sunday when I lay on the floor of my living room, and getting down on that floor is getting harder and harder, folks. I'm just telling you right now, I just lay there and I just beg God to give us an opportunity to care for those 20 girls one more year. right? What I love about this passage is that they had an abundant joy that spilled over into generosity for someone else. They gave what they had, Scripture says, and then some. And it's the and then some that makes it generous. I mean, why would we give one uniform shirt to a child at Cambridge when we could give two? Why would we give one shirt that has to be worn every day when you could give two and space it out in the week? I can tell you how it happened at our house. Dee Dee and I calculated the number of children we wanted to bless, then we wrote a check. We didn't start with the money we wanted to spend and said, this is what we can do. We started with the number of children we wanted to bless, then we wrote a check. Because it was about what? The children. It was never about what was in our wallet. It was about what was in our hearts. This is how generosity is defined. When I became a senior pastor, I began to wonder, what might it look like if we could be a part of a church that understood that the only reason we exist is to give ourselves away? What would it look like to be a church that would be open to opening the floodgates of tangible love? Could we trust that God could and would do more than we could imagine? Did we understand that we do not have the capacity to hold all that God wants to put in us, so that we have to consistently and constantly be making deposits of love and generosity in this world because God wants to keep pouring it? Could we create a church that understood that it was in the divine distribution business, the generous distribution of our love, our talents, our resources? And the answer to the question was this: yes. You can create that church because you have become that church. You are that church. It's exactly who you've become. The key to it, though, is to never be satisfied with what you just did, but you're constantly looking for the next opportunity. This is generosity. It's looking for the next spot to make a deposit. It's not sit around and pat yourself on the back. Look what we did yesterday. Yesterday's gone. Are we looking for the next opportunity? The shameful truth is you and I live in a world more interested in hanging on than giving it away. The world believes in situational generosity, which is a feeling of generosity, but not really a way of life. It's circumstantial. At Georgiana, we have never bought into situational generosity, something that we would happen just occasionally in our lives. Situational generosity is influenced by convenience. It is concerned only with the cost. We believe in ceaseless generosity. Ceaseless, never ends. That we would do for one what we wish we could do for everyone, instead of doing for none because we could only do for one. Did you track with that? Because that's the way most churches approach ministry, right? That we want to do for one what we wish we could do for everyone, but most places do for none because they can't do it for everyone. We see the whole world as a possible recipient of tangible love. It's about ripple effects. Our giving is intended to be viral, contagious, intentional, influential, all in the name of Jesus Christ. As I work with other churches, I find there are two types of giving. I give something to get something, or I give something to leave something. Which kind do you think we are? Right? We have one rule when it comes to communion offering. It's going to go to Brevard Schools Foundation this month. Our one rule is it can't have any bounce back. It's got to be unconditional. Then we write that check, and there's no strings attached. When there's no quid pro quo, there's no I scratch your back, you scratch my back, you do for me because we did for you. We're going to make a gift, and we're not going to look back, because after all, that's how the gift of grace came to us, right? There weren't any strings attached to that gift of grace, was there? Jesus didn't say, I'll give it to you if you do this. There was no if. He just gave you grace. Why wouldn't our gifts be the same thing? We have been blessed to be a blessing, so we bless. End of story. It is not a complicated formula for doing this. Secondly, I find that people approach generosity as an either-or situation. I will either give my time or my money, but rarely do I give both of them. It is not in the book. It is not in the book. It says that you are to give your entire self away. It's not, there is no either-or in the book. Have you ever wondered why missions are so important to us? Why we send teams to Belize and to Kenya and to Kentucky and Haiti and in our own backyard at House of Hope in Cambridge. Have you ever wondered why that is? Here's why it is. Until you see and know the plight of the needy, you will never give to them. Until you see and know the plight of the needy, you will never give to them. But once you see it, you will never stop. Anybody who's been to Haiti knows that from the drive from the airport to the orphanage exposes you to more poverty than you've ever seen in your lifetime. And that's the good part of Port-au-Prince. It's not even the bad part of Port-au-Prince. For everyone who's made that trip, the easiest check they write all year is that compassion offering check to those girls. It's as simple as that, right? Because once you see the plight of the needy, you never forget it. In the Bible, Jesus warns us not to lay up our treasures on earth. He understood completely what we have such a hard time accepting, that one day moth and rust would get everything we own, and Uncle Sam gets the rest. No matter what your income is, you're either moving away from your earthly treasure or towards it. Every one of us is one heartbeat away and closer to eternity. Trust me, if your treasure is in heaven and you're moving towards that all the time, then everything you're leaving in your wake is what? Just blessing. Just blessing. I read a story this week about Stephen King, who shared some concepts on wealth with college students. He said he came to fully understand what the phrase, "you can't take it with you," meant. He said after finding himself in a single car accident, lying in a ditch along a country road covered in blood and mud, with his tibia poking out of his right leg like a tree branch taken down in a thunderstorm, he said, "In that moment, I realized I had a MasterCard in my wallet. It had an endless credit limit. I was phenomenally wealthy. And I was laying in a ditch with glass in my hair, realizing there was nobody there to accept my MasterCard." He said, "We come into the world naked and broke, and we may be dressed when we go out, but we're just as broke. Warren Buffett is going to go out broke. Bill and Melinda Gates, going out broke. Tom Hanks, going out broke. Stephen King, broke. Not a crying dime among any of us," he said, "when we go out from this world." The reality is when somebody declares your time of death, when somebody says time of death, it will not matter whether they measured it on a Rolex or a Timex. You are dead. Your ability to have influence and make a difference in this world is over. You are gone, gone, gone. Timex, Rolex makes no difference, right? Time of death, 11:15. Done, right? The Bible tells us that your life is a gift to be given along the way. I believe every intentional and spontaneous act of generosity gives others hope that they may be on the very cusp of abandoning. What I witness around here is that we hold God's gifts in a loose hand, without clenched fists. I want to share a couple stories. I could share hundreds of stories. This sermon literally could have been 5 hours long. I want to share two true stories that happened in the church. Last week, we bought lunch as a church for a local school for their faculty. We've done this actually with a number of schools. This past week, their faculty is going to go back this week. We're going to buy them lunch as they come back. It's a team-building opportunity. It's a way for us to bless teachers, right? So Stacy, our finance pastor, called to make payment at a local restaurant and began to speak to a girl who worked there who was so confused about why a church was buying lunch for a school and paying the bill. She just couldn't get her head wrapped around that. She says, "The owners are going to have to deal with this." So I don't. It's not gonna bounce. So anyway, Stacy finally got a hold of the owners and began to explain her heart and the reasoning behind buying faculty lunch and supporting our local schools. And the owner said, hey, we're church people, and our church has never done anything like that. Can I tell you right now, I'm always surprised when generosity is a surprise to kingdom people. Why is it a surprise when the thing we're supposed to do happens? Why is anybody surprised? Secondly, a couple months back, Dee Dee and I were out to dinner and treated someone from our church to dinner. I saw them at the middle service. They were super gracious and did not know the rest of the story, so it was pretty cool. So we just anonymously paid for the dinner, and we got up and we left. We do this periodically. We don't do it every time we go out. So if I see you and I don't buy you dinner, don't fuss, all right? So it happens. I just let the Spirit move, And so we usually do it, no fuss, no fanfare. We just leave. And here's why we do that. We are frequently the benefactors of that. Gene and Charlie Brady bought us dinner not long ago. We were out at Outback. They bought us dinner. It was awesome. There was a period of time where Dee Dee and I were sitting on $200 worth of Carrabba's gift cards that we could not use because people kept buying us dinner. It was crazy. We're just like passing those gift cards out. Anyway, here's the deal. People will bless us, and we don't know who did it, and it'll just happen, and it's always a great blessing when it happens. It's like periodically, somebody will leave me a gift on the pulpit. No name, just a gift. Like 2 weeks ago, somebody in the church left me a stuffed rhino. It's adorable. It's very cute. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. I used it in the office the other day. I had an infant in my office. It came in handy. So no, that was good stuff. Well, this particular night, back to the story, and I can tell you one more thing about that. If you're going to do this, tip well, right? Don't penalize the wait staff because you're being generous to the number of the table and buying 2 dinners, right? You go, well, I'm just buying that dinner, so the waiter's going to have to be on there. Don't do that, right? So anyway, this couple that we blessed somebody else in the restaurant, just randomly. They didn't even know them. Then that person blessed somebody else, and that person blessed anyway, this happens 8 times in 2 hours, and the wait staff is losing their mind. They're like, woo! Did you see the tip I got? This is incredible. It's like the church is doing this thing. It's incredible, right? So ask me how I know this. Thanks for asking. So the last recipient that night was a pastor from another church in our community. You can't make that stuff up. That is so good. It was like I could have sent him a letter and told him he ought to do this thing, and then God sent him an object lesson instead. It was awesome, right? Because he said to me, he says, man, he says, that was incredible. He began to tell me how he said, everybody in the restaurant was abuzz about what this was happening. And the only thing we knew is that some really big guy from Georgiana had gotten all the things rolling. Why do you think it was me? You act like I'm the only big guy in this church, right? But come on. How much fun is that? How much fun is that? Right? You just bless somebody, and look what happened that night. All in the name of Jesus. Listen, Dee Dee taught me that when I go see Maureen, my teacher, my 3rd grade teacher at Cambridge, Dee Dee taught me to always take her a cup of coffee. Never go to her classroom without a cup of coffee. You should never visit a teacher without a cup of coffee. That's what Dee Dee taught me. I don't know if it's universally true for all you educators, but I show up, not just coffee, good coffee. I know what she wants. I know how she makes it. I know what she likes. I get it as I go through Starbucks. Well, I begin to do this. This is a weekly occurrence for me now in my 4th year. So periodically, again, I buy coffee for the car behind me. Because I don't drink coffee anymore. I don't have caffeine. And so for me, it's like I'm going to buy a coffee. I might as well buy a coffee, bless the person behind me, right? Then, a little side note, I did that 2 years ago. It was like little did I know, it was a car full of teenagers on their way to school. $45 later, it was like, woo! I bought breakfast. It was like, what a blessing, right? So about a year ago, I'm in line, and I buy the coffee, the person behind me, I can never see who they are, but by the time they pull up, I realize it's a really attractive 20-something woman in the car, and then I begin to think, oh man, what if this is like creepy? What if I was like the creeper dude buying coffee, like I was going to circle back around and go, I mean, I just had those thoughts. We got a lot of weirdness going on in the world, so I don't want to contribute to that. So now I'm having to explain to the cashier every time I do it, it's a Jesus thing. Just tell them it's a Jesus thing, right? I don't want to date. I'm good, right? I'm not looking for anything. So anyway, so this is life, right? So generosity is complicated sometimes, but you should do it anyway, right? Generosity has always been a way of life at our house. We literally have known what it means to have plenty, and we know what it means to have had little. Because it's a heart issue and not a wallet issue, we have never let it affect our giving. Our giving has always been our giving. Generosity is an act of intentionality in our home. We want to give and serve. I would never ask you to do something that I have not already done or am not currently doing as a part of this church, because Jesus leads by example. Your shepherd should lead by example. This is what we do. Can I brag on my wife for a minute? Now, can I just share some cool things? I mean, I know Nathan likes to throw Daisy under the bus when he preaches, and I would never frivolously use Dee Dee in a sermon just to get a laugh. I'm way too mature for that, so not like Nathan. So Daisy, I'm so sorry. So let me take a moment just to share a little bit about my wife. Dee Dee is not a typical pastor's wife. I don't know what a typical pastor's wife looks like, but Dee Dee's not it, right? She has her own service. This is her service. You know her better than anybody else in the church. Dee Dee does not sit on the front row with me, despite 16 years of me asking her to. She sits over there with her friends, and that's where she belongs, and that's where she wants to be. And she just goes over there, and she just wants to fly under the radar. New members ask me all the time, we hear you talk about Dee Dee. What does she look like? We've never met her. And I said, well, that's her whole goal, is to never be met by you. So she's doing a good job with that. Three Sundays ago, we did a baptism, and Janice was up front sitting with me, and the family that was visiting asked Janice, oh, are you Pastor Corky's wife? And so I told Janice, I said, not a bad deal for me, but I think you got the short end of that. Just a compliment for me, thank you. But anyway, so Dee Dee spends her life, September through May, with 5-year-olds. That's what she does. But as soon as school is over this year, as she has done 25 of the last 30 years, she goes to youth camp to serve as camp mom, where she obnoxiously wakes up children every morning. She has been asked to sell her morning recordings to some of you parents because while it's not a very joyful noise, it is effective of getting y'all out of bed, is it not? Right? So it's she can rouse a teenager. Right after youth camp was over, she had time to wash her clothes, and in about a week later, she joined me as we herded 30 sheep, for 12 days in Greece and Turkey, and she spent all day counting heads and collecting tips for drivers and guides and reminding me that I was getting a little crispy on the edges and that I should tell my face that I was having a good time and was happy to be here and loved our church people. And so for 12,000 steps a day, she was with me every single one of them. She then got home from that to where she promptly led with Denny Cheshire a mission trip to Kentucky that was great. I had a number of children and youth from our church. The parents were not with them. And then so she and Denny had to get all 17 of them home 24 hours after they left the mission field in Salyersville, through one weather delay after another, with a sleepover in Newark, because that's where everybody would like to spend the night, right? Without your luggage is in Newark, right? And the whole time she's on the phone with Chris Rodriguez and I, because Chris and I have a safe sanctuaries policy, and we've got all these unaccompanied minors that we've got to make sure we're all in the right rooms. They're not in a room with an adult by themselves. I mean, it was complicated, right? I mean, it's just crazy. Only to spend the next day getting them all home on 5 different flights. She finally got home at 10 o'clock that night. Then last weekend, she gave up 5 days to follow her husband to Virginia to perform a wedding, because no one gets married in the church anymore. So we all have to travel to do that. But she gave that up so that she could go and be supportive of me. Anyway, I tell you this morning, she simply inspires me. She, like many of you, just quietly serves her church. She's not looking for a trophy. She's not looking for an attaboy. She didn't know I was going to talk about her this morning. She inspires me, because this is what it ought to look like. And what I know is we've been married for 35 years this Christmas, and she's just been doing this for 35 years. She doesn't let anything get in the way of serving her Lord, no matter how tired she is, right? It's what she does. Let me close with this. I think at our house, we want to model generosity for our children. I know I want to model this for our leadership and our staff. And in 2 weeks, I'm going to give back-to-back Saturdays to teach these same principles of generosity to other Methodist churches in our district, because I believe Jesus did lead by example. We should lead by example. It's what we ought to do. Listen, at our house, we give and serve because we believe God, who gave everything for us, has called us to be in the game and not observers on the sidelines. I wanted my children to grow up knowing that life was not about them, but it's about what you leave as you move through life. That we always want to be remembered as givers and not takers. I love our church. Examples of generosity and love abound everywhere in this church. Neighbors loving neighbors, food being taken to the shut-ins. I love that people aren't waiting for an invitation or permission from their church to be generous. It's become our culture. We understand and hear that we exist to give ourselves away out there. You know what I've never heard in 20 years of ministry? I've never had a pastor, Nathan, Kelly, Chris, any of the pastors come to me and say, you know what, we have too many volunteers. Can you tell the church to back off a little bit? right? They've never come to me and said, listen, we are swamped with volunteers. Can you just tell them, take a rest? I mean, even now, Kelly's got needs for children ministry volunteers. We always have a need for volunteers, right? Because priorities are funny things, aren't they? We know they're important. We want to keep them in balance. But there's always going to be something rising up to challenge them. This is never an issue if generosity is a core value. If generosity is your core value in time, talent, and resources, if it's already a priority, then you're just waiting to say yes. Trust me when I tell you that Georgiana is a generous church. I heard this week the shock. I met with Wendy Smith, who's the principal at Cambridge. She talked about parents' reaction to getting a shirt, children's reaction to getting a brand new shirt that was not a hand-me-down from a sibling or a neighbor. Talk about brand new, right? And what a blessing it was. That's right. We've already given out the shirts that we have not yet fully paid for because I'm going to live by faith in you and not by sight. We didn't wait till we had all the money to buy the shirts to know what we needed to do, right? Because that's how we live. Georgiana is a vessel of love. This week, as kids and teachers return to school, we will have blessed 3 high schools, 2 junior highs, and 2 elementary schools with a variety of tangible gifts of support. It is a purposeful statement to the enemy that when our schools are under attack, and they are under attack, that this church is going to stand with them. And we didn't wait for something bad to happen to stand with them. We wanted to stand with them day one. We wanted to make a statement. The generosity of our God towards us is unprecedented. It's unmatched in history. He gives his unfailing love. He gives rest to the weary. He gives peace to the fearful. He gives joy when we are sad. He gives comfort when we're grieving. He gives us forgiveness when we're guilty. He gives us hope when we're filled with doubt. He gave us his son.